started.
Okay, thank you. And I know things didn't go as well as we had hoped last week, and I hope it'll be better. I appreciate the feedback that I did get from some of you, with some with suggestions and some with questions. And I tried really hard to accommodate this presentation with as many of those suggestions as possible, but we'll see how it goes. I know you saw this last time, but I just wanted to remind us that integration, I'm always amazed with how, even though Mrs. Slerland's vocabulary for describing some of the things might have been different, how she managed to incorporate so much of what is being discovered in modern times into that lesson plan in such a robust way. And certainly one of those, and the same thing with Dr. Orton, he got a few things wrong, but he certainly got a lot right, considering that he couldn't examine the brain the way it's possible to do today. But the main thing from this, as you probably remember from last time, is that focusing on the fact that the phonological pathway needs to connect with the orthographic pathway, which occurs here, and then all of those need to connect with a semantic pathway. And the very first reference that's in the bibliography is one by Ginger Berninger on triple word form theory. That's not in the title, but that's what it's about. And what she's going beyond the findings of the National Reading Panel to include the syntax and morphology and the orthography in a more diverse way. So that's a really, I think it's a 2010 article, but the research on that idea continues to be borne out and replicated and confirmed. So it's a good one to have. And I tried to get rid of the reference to this piece, but for some reason I couldn't see the animation numbers. I don't know what I did to make that happen, but they weren't there. So that's just, as I said last time, that's just showing the with family history versus without family history in terms of connectivity. So this you have from last time. I also sent it again, and I sent a second email with a bigger version of the PowerPoint handout, because when I printed it off, I couldn't see it. It was too small. So sorry about that. And chances are if you do print any of it, you're only going to want to print some pages because there's a lot of repetition. Okay, so notes. Thanks, Ruth took the information from the chat, and thank you, Ruth, for doing that. And also thank you to those who returned feedback forms. So this is just some questions that came up. One was the request to be able to see each other, which I don't know if we can see each other, but at least we can hear each other, which is an improvement over last time. Whoever has the phone, could they mute just until it stops ringing? Okay, thank you. And then another request was to have a clearer view of the documents as they're being created. And some of you apparently could see, and some of you couldn't. And that was my premiere voyage with the document reader. I think I need a class with Shira before I do it the next time. But I'll keep working on it, but that's not as much of an issue. I tried to get around it this time by doing it a little differently, the old-fashioned way. So one question, I don't know if the person who said, what is the FLSZ spelling convention? There's not much to it, but as most of you already know, if you have a one-syllable word with one vowel letter that ends in FL, S, or Z, we usually double the FL, S, or Z. And some of you have learned it or taught it as if you have a one-syllable word with a short vowel sound, and it usually is a short vowel sound, but you also have words like full and stall and a few others where it's not a short vowel sound, but it is one vowel letter. So, and then this was a suggestion that Ruth made when we were talking about some of the words that were in the sentence that we chose to talk about last time. And her suggestion was, when you looked at these were the words that she came up with. There were other words in the sentence that had these elements: the DR consonant blend, the OND, the UG, and the SM. And so her suggestions, those would be some words that could be used to practice those elements that weren't necessarily the words that were in the sentence. And then the copying we'll cover more next time when we talk about the visual, focus on the visual side of the lesson plan, and the decoding to proofread. That might, I'll try to mention that when we get to that point where it would have been used today, and then it might also come up again next time. So please keep the feedback coming because it really helps. It doesn't matter if it's good or bad feedback or positive or negative. It still helps me know what to do differently if I, or at least to try to. Okay. Oh, sorry. This wasn't supposed to happen. Now I see I was trying to get rid of the animation and I put in a double dose. Okay. So we talked what this is just showing you what we're going to focus on today. So the learning to write, not going to be any new letters, but we will be practicing cursive letter connections and then the auditory part of the plan. And we talked last time a little bit about skills and functional use, and every Slurlin lesson is designed to go on both the visual and the auditory side, from skills to functional use. And A and B are generally focusing on the skills, and C and D are generally focusing on the functional use, with the goal, of course, which is independent writing on the auditory side. And I just grayed out because we're not going to be talking about this one, but it still holds that A and B on the visual side would be teaching skills, C and D, functional use, and then of course the goal is independent reading on that side. Okay, so this is one of the forms that I sent you last week, one of the templates. And so that it was hard for you. I think this is what was hard for people to see that I was trying to fill in. So I filled it in, and this shows you the first part, which is A and B. So this would be the skills part of this lesson. And this would be the functional use aspects. But remember, we also said that if you're planning an auditory lesson, you start at the bottom, you start at the end, and you work up in the other direction. Having said that, it's not just the sentence here, but it's also this phrase and the suffixes and the other things that we're using in spelling. And then there were phrases here. And I wanted to make this point because you may have noticed that the template number 3, when it gets to spelling, it's blank. And the reason it's blank is because the parts of spelling, and that in the template number 2, you know the very first one is verbalization conceptualization, for when we'd be teaching a new suffix or prefix. But we're not teaching that, so we're not teaching a new one, so we would skip it. But you could also start that lesson with phrases that don't have any suffixes or prefixes. So basically, within the spelling section, all of the parts that are listed don't have to be in a certain order. So you might do phrases that have no words with affixes. You might practice red flag words and put some of the red flag words in a sentence before you practice base word plus affix. And that's the reason that third one, and when it's there, even if the numbers are missing, even if there's a blank so people can renumber it, they tend to think because it's listed there in that order that they should do it in that order. So that's why we added the one that has no numbers, where you put the parts into spelling as you choose, but you have to have practiced it the other ways first in order to know what those parts are. If that makes no sense whatsoever, please tell me now and ask questions. But if it does make sense, then that's okay.
Saying that if you use affixes, you could maybe do that part like swiftly, if that's going to be in the phrase, and then do your phrases after that.
Well, when it just says phrase, it means these phrases don't have any words with affixes. I have more phrases and a sentence, but these phrases do have words with affixes.
Okay.
So if I wanted to practice, for example, in this case, I have a consonant LE word here. I have a word with X, and that can sometimes be confusing. Kids need to understand the difference between the X when it's 2 morphemes, like in more than one socks, or when it's just the sound that's part of the actual base. There could be a number of reasons why. Might be that I wanted to practice a little bit more with use of TCH. Or here, maybe I wanted them to get more practice with 2 and 3 syllable words. But whatever the case is, that I didn't have any, there are some words in here that have suffixes and prefixes, but they haven't been taught as prefixes and suffixes. The words that are in these phrases are just words with that are being treated as syllables with one vowel sound, which is spelled with a vowel grapheme that they've learned.
Okay.
So that's the main. And then I did practice some of the suffixes. We practiced adding suffixes to swift and adding a suffix to solve, and then both of those words were in the phrase. So that's number 2 base word, but this could have been number 1, and this could have been number 2. That's the thing. But but everything that's under base word plus affix, which includes introduction of a new affix, using just the base word plus the prefix or suffix, not in a phrase or sentence, and then putting it into a phrase. All of that's still in under that category. And that would need to be in a specific sequence because you're working from the smaller unit to the larger unit. Does that make sense?
Yes.
And then when you get to red flag words, I don't have a number here because the only red flag words in these phrases and sentence were the and So I didn't need to practice those red flag words. But if I'm teaching a new red flag word, it would go here. If I'm reviewing red flag words, they would go here. And then I can have a phrase or a sentence using the new and or review red flag words. And maybe they would also have a base word with an affix, but you would do whatever you need to do to practice the red flag word first before you had them write the sentence or the phrase. And you would have practiced adding the suffix that you needed to practice. So, and I could have included this just the way I did back up here. Vivo, could you hold it down, please? Vivo. Okay, sorry. So does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay. And then,
I have a question
okay,
on the phrases in number 1. Would you dictate those as they are, or do you have them practice the parts?
we're going to talk about every single one of these parts. And if I don't answer that question when we're talking about the parts, then please ask that question again.
Okay.
Okay. I just was trying to give an overview first, and then we're going to go to this part, which everything's covered up except for the letter connections that we would practice, and this, which is the list of all of the aspects that have already been taught that are in the card pack. Okay. And so you can get a sense, it doesn't have every single thing that's been taught because there's some things that are taught that aren't in the card pack, but everything that you can see here has been taught. So we've got the alphabet, and in this case, I just put the vowel in there, and that would be the short vowel sound, the vowel consonant, the consonant digraphs that have been taught, the other vowel graphemes that have been introduced, and the 2 just means they're 2 because in U consonant could be oo as in flute, or it could be U as in mule. So when in the visual card pack, they would only have it in there once, but for auditory, you'd have to have 2. And they've learned 3 of the R controlled, and these are the only double vowels that have been taught. They've learned consonant LE. They've learned 10 of them. They're all basically the same. You might not include SLE because it's the only word I can think of that SLE is in is hassle. There are actually more STLEs, but there's still only a handful. And I include these also as final stable syllables. It's really important, but I've underlined these because whereas the LE is not necessarily a suffix, the ION is. And so in these final stable syllables, the suffix is ION. I don't have to teach ION separately as a suffix before I teach this final stable syllable, but I usually do it at the same time because ION would have the same effect on a word as NESS. It makes it into a noun that names an idea. The T or the S would be from whatever the morpheme is that is before that final stable syllable. So if it's invention, the base is VENT, and this T comes from the VENT. That's how you know it's a T. If it's succession, it comes from the base CESS. If it's education, they couldn't spell that for a while, because where does the T come from in education? What's the morpheme that comes right before before that ION? What's the word without the shun?
Educate.
Educate, exactly. So what is it at the end of educate that's a morpheme? It's not necessarily a base. It could be a base, it could be a suffix. What's the suffix at the end of educate?
ION.
ION is at the end of education, but we've taken that one off. We have the word educate.
Oh, ATE.
ATE, exactly. And in this case, it makes it into a verb, educate, and then the ION. And that's how you know that the T isn't part of the suffix, because it was ATE and the E had to be dropped because the suffix began with an I. I can't see you, so I can't tell how you're taking that in, but if it doesn't make sense, ask another question. But that's, anyway, that's more than, you don't have to go into all of that detail when you teach shun, but they need to understand that it's, when they hear shun at the end of a word, it's a final stable syllable. And these are two of the ways. There's also CIAN if it's a person, like in physician. You don't have to teach that for a while. And there is TIAN, but only Lilliputian, Christian, and there's one other one. What is the other one? There just aren't a whole lot of TIAN, so there's not a whole lot of need for that one. You can still tell them it exists, but.
My favorite Martian.
Oh, Martian, that's right. Thank you. And of course, unfortunately, Mars ends in an S, and that doesn't quite fit, but they don't ever miss Martian. You can't win them all. Yeah, okay. All right, and then I have suffixes listed here. And although suffixes aren't in the card pack in the traditional sense, where you would ask them for the sound as you would for in the auditory cards, you could give them the prompt during written auditory cards. Write the suffix that makes a word tell what's happening, or write the suffix that usually makes the word into an adverb that tells how. And then it's just some people do that, some people don't do that. It's not a you have to or you. It's not wrong or right. It's just another way, a variation on the theme. So the reason I'm focusing on this is to give you an idea for this kid. This actually was a student after summer, about 2 months after summer school. I was asked to do a demonstration with a group of the students that were in the speech and language therapy program at San Francisco State, and they had their own little student organization for SLPs. And one of the members had taken the course, and she asked if I would do a presentation explaining what the learn alone approach is. And we thought the best way to do that was to bring a kid along and do a lesson. And so that's what I did. And you see, we had our question of the day, and since she was taking time from her weekend, her question, I don't know what I just said, but Alexa thought I was talking to her. She'll be quiet in a minute. Sorry. Why did you agree to spend your Saturday teaching these teachers? And she had a nice, whatever I asked, she's giving me a very long-winded answer, I'm sorry to say. Alexa, stop, please. Okay. Okay, so why did you, anyway, that's not relevant except for the fact that I just didn't want you to think we didn't have one. We didn't have a question today. All right, and this will make more sense as we go along. This is a lot of practice with letter connections, and it's not likely that I would have time to do that many, but I think as we go along, you should be able to tell why I chose the ones I chose, even though I might not have used all of them. Can you just, by looking at it, can you see anything that occurs more than once that often is something that kids have trouble with when they're writing cursive?
You
It's
have a
okay.
lot of high connections.
Okay, there's some high connections. Anything else? Why do you think I might have chosen SA, even if you don't remember the sentence? Why might I have chosen capital SA? Because the sentence began with, I think it was Sam.
With a name, a person's
It
name.
was a name, but yeah. And I wouldn't always include the capital in a sentence, but capitals aren't written as often. And so again, it depends upon how automatic my student would be. And this student had been a student in summer school, but I hadn't seen her for 2 months, and she had just begun working with a tutor, but she had just begun. So I really didn't know what was going to still be in that little head of hers. But a lot was, which was very reassuring. Okay, so
Why-
now,
why
oh,
would
I'm
you
sorry, go
have-
ahead.
Why would you have OLVE though? Is that like you're only leaving off one letter?
Well, I did, but it was a way of getting a high connection that didn't have to dip down, like for the V, because when you connect an E to a high connecting letter,
Yeah.
you have to dip down a little further than usual, or it doesn't look like an E.
Okay.
So yeah. And it didn't have, not focused at all on the sound. It really was just focused on difficulty that the student might have with the letters
Okay.
that were going to be there. And the other one, the X, I find that because we teach the N is 2 downstrokes and the M is 3 downstrokes, and the V starts the X starts the same way as the V, but it doesn't come up for a high connection. And I've had quite a number of middle schoolers and high schoolers that when they make the X, they make the X with a high connection and then they cross it. I mean, they were doing that before I met them, so I don't take credit for that, but I have to get them to stop doing that. Anyway, so that's why the X was in there. Okay, thank you for asking that question, MJ. Okay, so then moving on to the auditory cards. And these are the oral cards, which are not ones that I chose the oral cards actually after I chose the written cards. I chose the written cards first because of how they showed up in the words. And I tried to show it to be sure that it was clear whether I was talking about the long vowel sound or the short vowel sound. And there was only, let's see, where do we have? I have write what says A, and then I have a 3 because they had learned 3 ways, A consonanty, AI, and AY. And then later, I know it's here. Well, it was maybe it's not here anymore. But I had somewhere I thought I had AY with a line under it because then I just said write what spells A at the end of a base word. It seems to have disappeared, but it's on the piece of paper for the lesson, so I know that it was intended to be there. It would be like this, except it had the, so in this, here I have write what spells K, and then I might tell them, underline the one you would use if you didn't have a reason to use it, another one, which would be C. Circle the one that you would use at the end of a word if it's not right after a short vowel sound. But this one was write what spells K at the end of a word if it's not right after a short vowel sound, because there's a word in the that they're going to write, which is Ike. Strike, I think, is the word. I can't remember for sure. So that was giving them a little extra practice with that. And then the prompt here would be write what says shun at the end of a word. And since I only have the one with the T, I might say write what spells T in a word like invention at the end of a word, or I might say write the more common because T is more common. But otherwise, they'd have to write both. And maybe they would anyway, and I'd give them another cue. Any questions about that?
Yes, I didn't understand that last one. They would write.
If I say just write what spells shun at the end of a word, and I've taught them as it shows up here, TION and SION, they would write both of them. If I don't say anything, they wouldn't have any idea which one I meant. So they would write both.
Okay.
And then I might say, choose the one you would use if you were spelling the word invention. So then they have to say invention, try to think about what it would be without that ION, and hopefully choose the right one. But then it's relating it to the lesson, but they're still not writing the word yet. I could do the same thing back here with the K. I could say, write what says K at the end of a word following the vowel sound R or, because that has a consonant, but it's not, but the R in that sense, but it's not a short vowel sound. And so it's not CK because the vowel sound is or R. That would just be another way of getting them to think about what they're going to have to think about when they're writing those words later. Any questions? Okay. So on this, I know that I don't think that, I mean, some Slytherin teachers use the pre-encoding term for the first part where kids, you're doing either vowel perception or vowel discrimination or vowel position. Some don't. So it's not wrong or right. It's just a variation on the theme, like I said. But what that would be here, because it's a review, it's the reviewing concepts. We're not teaching a new vowel phoneme and its spelling. We're practicing ones that they've already learned. And so it's review, which was highlighted, and then discrimination because it's a variety. And these are the vowel sounds that are represented in the words that we're spelling later in the lesson. And these aren't the same words, except one of them is, and that's, I think, stay. Maybe it isn't. Can't remember. There aren't that many words that end in AY. And so that might be one reason I stuck with that one. But the others, there wouldn't be another choice. That font looks a little bigger than the rest of it. I didn't see that before. Okay, so then in oral encoding, where they're not going to write it, except in the air, of course. And with the pocket chart, we did wax, solve, and glitch. And all those three words, well, remember when we were looking at the phrases that didn't have words with affixes added? Those were three of the words I might have pointed out as possibilities for why I wanted to put them in phrases. The other reason that I might have done this on the pocket chart instead of off the pocket chart in this particular case is so the people who were watching could see the process with the pocket chart, which makes it easier for them to internalize those steps than if the kids are just doing it off the chart. But I could have done it for a reason for the kid too. So this was oral encoding, and I didn't do any without the pocket chart. I could have done it differently. That's just what I chose to do for that lesson. And this is referring to the side of the paper when they start. Let me go ahead and show you what. So I'll go back. Don't worry, I'm going back to, okay. Remember that paper that I showed you last time, but we didn't use it? So for the two, it might be that I have them still using 2-line paper for the connections because it's harder for them not to move their whole arm when they're practicing that, and they may still need that gross motor practice with the connections. Then the 3-line paper was used for the written auditory cards. Write what spells, write what says ah. And then we used the 5-line paper when we got to words. So this was on side 1, and this was on the other side. And so, I mean, that's no big, I just wanted you to know what I was talking about. No, where am I? This is where we are. Okay, so so these were with the pocket chart, but it was oral and they weren't writing. And then these are the words that they wrote. They didn't use a pocket chart, but they spelled these words orally, wrote it in the air, and then wrote it on the paper. And you saw that, which you'll see again. So this was the skill part. This was the single unit phoneme to grapheme practice, and then we got to the word level. The one thing I wanted to point out up here is that a lot of times when we get to written cards, sometimes teachers think, I don't need to do that. I've already written the letters up here and I've already practiced the sounds here. Then I don't think I need to do this. Well, I don't know what they think, but they just, a lot of times they don't do it. And this is a reason it's really, really important. Up here, there's nothing it has nothing to do with sounds. The teacher's saying, write FT, write OMP, write SWI. The child has to remember the sequence of letters, the sequence of movements for forming each of those letters, and how to connect them. They don't have to know anything about the sounds. When they get here, what spells B? Then the student is going to write in the air B, ball, B. What spells E? Is that eh? Should be. Oh no, because they've only done vowel consonant E. What spells E? E, consonant E. They're writing it in the air. They're not writing it on paper. Then when we get to here, write what spells ah. They have to remember. They have to remember how to write it up here too, but they don't have to remember how to write it and get it onto the paper with all the spacing requirements and those other things. So this is the first time when they've had to use that integration from the auditory to the kinesthetic for writing. And of course the visuals in there because they have to remember what it looks like. So it's really, really important and it's really important to give them practice with the ones that might be tricky. It's why you want to use anything up here, even if because anything with a high connection or that has the potential for causing them trouble. And then you want to make sure that you practice it again here if necessary when they had to integrate it with the sound. Okay.
Nancy, when you do the written cards, do you have them write it in the air, then put it on paper?
That would, if you remember on the procedure card, there's a progression 1 and a progression 2. Progression 1 would have them to do it orally and then write it. But progression 2 is write what spells. And you may remember from, maybe not, it was more than a year ago now, summer school, where the students, that was one of the things they really liked because they liked being able to check to see if they were correct. Right. So they wrote it, and then I wrote it on the board. Then the visual for them, instead of showing them the card, was writing it on the board. And they were checking to see if they were correct 2 ways. 1, did you spell the sound that I dictated? First of all, and second of all, did you form the letter correctly? And they do both of those kinds of proofreading, and then they trace a name. Remember that part? Remember that?
I do. Thank you.
Yeah. And it does have that progression 1 where you do it again, and depending upon whether you're teaching younger kids or older kids, remember, as fast as you can, but as slow as you must. And you want to go as fast as they can go, but you don't want to go so fast that they fall apart. So, and the sooner you can get them not to have to do the whole thing, the better, but you don't go faster than they can be successful. Okay, so that was our A and B, our skills. Then we go, this is the whole C and D section, which starts immediately with phrases, no suffixes or prefixes, then base word plus suffix, base word plus suffix, and then the phrase. And now the question that you asked about, did I choose the words? I didn't have them write Swift. I don't think I did. Let me check and make sure. I didn't have them write Swift in encoding. You see, I didn't. I had them encode it here because they have to. And then if you want to change the word into a word that tells how, then what would the suffix be? ly, the suffix that usually makes a base word. Tell how. Swift, swiftly. And then I did it. I had the second one over here, and I would have the paper folded in half so they would be able to line it up. Solve. What's tricky about solve? There's no wrong answer. There might be something tricky I didn't think of. I mean, obviously I'm thinking of something. It doesn't mean that's the only tricky thing about it.
Two high connections.
For writing, there are two high connections, and one of them is a VE, which
Well, there's
let's
already, oh, sorry.
go ahead.
There's already an E there, but they have to add ED. The V, it can't end in the word doesn't end just in V. You had to have the E.
Right. And that E is there because the word can't end in a V. But when we add the suffix, it's not ending in a V anymore, is it?
No,
So you drop the E in the same way that you would. If a word ends in an E that's not pronounced, then if you're adding a suffix that begins with a vowel, that the E or the vowel that's in the suffix replaces the E that was there. And kids will say, well, I didn't really add an ED, I just added a D. And then you can say, well, what does D mean? And it doesn't mean anything by itself. But ED does mean something, and that's the difference. So the ED is a unit. It means something, and so that's what you're adding. You had an E there that was no longer needed, and so you replaced it. Does that make sense?
Nancy, could you
Yes.
go back up to the phrases at the top, number
Oh,
one?
I did kind of forget those, didn't I? Okay.
Marcia asked, would you dictate the whole phrase or would you do a word at a time?
Ah, that was your question, Marcia. Okay, thank you. So I would dictate the whole phrase, but some of those words we did practice, didn't we? Yes, we wrote candle. We wrote candle when we were in written encoding, and we splendid. Some of the more difficult ones we've already encoded and written on paper before I asked them to put it in the phrase.
Okay, so then you dictate the phrase since you already practiced the parts that they needed to practice.
Right, or that I anticipated they needed to practice. Sometimes we don't always anticipate everything we need to.
And sometimes you ask, which of those words have we already encoded?
Yeah, well, a lot of times you do. And are there any red flag words? And why? And then in that case, which words had we already encoded? One of them we didn't write on paper, but two of them we still encoded. One of them we did in oral encoding. What are the two that we practiced? Can you see that on your? Wax was up here in oral encoding.
Right.
And then candle was down here in written encoding. And then there is one red flag word, but one that they almost certainly know. And so I might say, well, why do you think we didn't encode hot ahead of time? Because that's one that I think they can do automatically. And even having that conversation, or you might say, why? Well, because it just has one consonant, and then it has one short vowel sound and another consonant. No consonant blends, no digraphs, no. I don't think I'd probably go into all that detail, but it is. But the reason wouldn't have them do it is because of those reasons. Because it's easier for them to do. Okay, and thank you for Ruth and Martha for asking the question and reminding me that I didn't get it quite right. So a glitch in the fine plan. We have, let's go back here.
Can I ask another question?
Sure.
The detailed questions that you're asking the students to have them process what it is they have learned. Do you do that for the little guys?
I do. And I have to say that I teach older kids more often, but in summer school, we always have a first grade class. And we always have, the kids that are coming to summer school after first grade are the kids who are in the biggest trouble because they wouldn't be coming to summer school otherwise. And our first grade teacher, Christine, some of the things that we've tried with older kids and it worked fine. And then I gave her the choice of what she wanted to choose. For example, with the consonant LE, we used to have them, it was really long, but it's a letter combination that makes a whole syllable when it comes at the end of a word. If they know what it means, the words themselves aren't hard, but there are a lot of them. And they learned to do that. But then when we just thought, why are we doing that? Why don't we just call it what it is? A final stable syllable. Well, most of us didn't know what a final stable syllable was until we started teaching Slurlin, or maybe even after we'd been teaching Slurlin for a really long time before we knew what that was. But the words aren't, what does final mean? At the end. And they may not know what stable means, but you can tell them stable, it means that you can depend on it. It's not going to change. So when that is at the end, it's going to be a whole syllable, final stable syllable. And so she said, I think they can handle that. And she taught it, and they can. And these are the kids, they're not just younger, but they're younger kids who are having the most trouble. And they get it, and they can explain it. But she doesn't just assume once she told them that they understand. She still asks them, why is it called a final stable syllable? Because it's at the end. And because when it's at the end, it always makes a whole syllable. I mean, they may not say exactly like that, but that's what you're trying to get out of them. Did that help?
It did. Thank you.
I mean, I know that there are lots of differences of opinion about this, and this is my opinion, which definitely doesn't mean I'm right. But my feeling is that as long as they understand what we're teaching them to say, and that the cognitive load is less because they understand why they're doing it. Whereas if they're just memorizing something and just saying it, and they don't remember why they're saying it, then that's more to remember than if they did understand it. Like I said, it doesn't mean I'm right. That's just what my experiences convinced me of.
Okay, thank you.
Sure.
Nancy, also
Yes.
with those phrases, would
Mhm.
you introduce the who, what, when, where kinds of questions?
Well, I might. Well, I would have already we were already done it in reading from the book, the who, what, where, when, why, and prep for reading. But the thing is that when you choose a phrase for structured reading or reading from the book, you already know you're taking it out of context, but you can tell from looking at where it is in a sentence in the book, in the text, whether it's going to be a where or a when or a why. Sometimes it appears that something would be. In the case of these three, they all have to be what's or whose. And in this case, they're all what's, because they all three start with articles. That's also why you want to make sure that if you have a what or a who phrase, that it has other information. So it's the wax, and hot and candle are both describing wax. And a glitch, what kind of glitch? A glitch in the fine plan. Now, if it's all by itself, might seem as if it's aware, but in this case, it's not aware. It's an adjective phrase it's describing glitch. And it goes with glitch just the way hot and candle did with wax. And please ask questions if that doesn't make sense, because that was something I'm sorry to say I learned it a few decades later than I should have. And then in a splendid but complex invention, you have a noun phrase, but it's compound. You have two nouns. No, you don't. Sorry.
Two.
You have a compound adjective describing the noun. Sorry about that. Yeah. A splendid but complex. So it could be just like if it were and or but or. It's still two adjectives that are intended to be describing invention. And that's I'm not sure I would do all three of those phrases in the same lesson, because if I did, I might not have time for what comes after it. But I wanted you to see examples of what could be. And then if I have already decided, if I already realize when I'm at this point in my lesson, that if I do these three words and or this phrase, I'm not going to get to any of this. And if I already know that I definitely want to practice the base words plus affixes, then I can not do split. That's why I put them last. I don't have to do those three words. But if I don't do those three words, then I don't do this phrase. And I always have to put something there in my lesson plan, put it in a different color, write myself a note, because once I get going, I just go full steam ahead, and I sometimes don't remember all the considerations I had before I started. So I would have to mark that in some way. But I also would want to mark that I didn't do it, so I might put it in another lesson that's coming up, because it really is a good phrase. Don't you love some of your phrases? You don't want to let them go. Oops, sorry. Okay, so, and then always having delusions of grandeur about what I can get finished, then I could also have mark, marking, mark. Now, this was a completely practical decision. Marker is just as good as any of these others, but I have 5-line paper. I am not going to have room for 4 of these in a row because this sentence is not going to fit. Sorry, that keeps happening. That sentence is not going to fit. So I have to keep 2 lines just in case. But I could have them add the ER to make the word marker and write it in the air and just not write it on paper. So I've still practiced ING, ED, and ER. And I could do that one after they write mark on their paper. I could have them, what can you do to change mark into something that marks? Marker, what suffix did you add to change it? I add the suffix ER. It's a suffix that makes a base word name the doer in the air, and then you go right on with what you're doing, and this time you add ING, but they write it on paper. This time they write ED and they write it on paper. And then you've got a sentence. Sam marked the line with a gray pen. And Marcia, in going back to your other question, you want them always to hear the whole sentence first. Sam marked the line with the gray pen. And I want them, because I'm really want to integrate their ability to hear a sentence and think about the who, what, where, when type of questions that we're getting them to think about when they're reading. So who, Sam, action, marked. But if I dictated it, I would put those 2 together. It's 2 different parts, but Sam marked what? The line. How did he mark it? With a gray pen.
So they would
What?
listen to it.
They'd listen to the whole thing.
Do they say the whole sentence back to you and then you ask your questions?
It depends upon the group, but chances are I would say it once. I might say it again depending upon the group, but I wouldn't have them repeat it yet. Then I would do the who and the action and the what and the how. And then I might say who, Sam, what did Sam do? The action, marked. And I might say, when I dictate the sentence, I'm going to put those 2 together. Sam marked, repeat, Sam marked. They're still not writing it yet. And then what did he mark? The line, how, with a gray pen.
So are you doing verbally what you might have done on a lower level on paper?
You mean if they were reading it?
No, for the dictation, because I would have had them write each of those words. I would have had them write it in phrases.
But you would dictate 1 word at a time?
Sometimes a word, this would have been up in the other parts of the lesson. I would have had all of those pieces in there.
Right.
But
sometimes you need to do that.
From what I understand you're saying is some of this may not have been on paper at all. So they're going straight from the auditory and then to paper.
Well, they wouldn't be using, I think the answer to the question, the overall answer to your question is yes. But remember, now Sam, they practiced SA, and spelling Sam is not going to be hard for them if they're doing this other stuff, right?
Right.
And I don't remember if I did line. Did I do line? I did fine. I didn't do line, but that's that they were practicing the same idea. And we practiced stay and gray. I had them write gray because there aren't that many choices, and they did stay when we were just doing vowel discrimination. Pen, it has its own difficulties because of the eh and the I. But if that's not something that, so with and pen and Sam aren't going to be hard words for them, or I wouldn't be giving them this sentence like this.
Okay.
And then line, we practiced that other one that I've already forgotten, fine.
Mhm.
And that was in a phrase up here.
Okay.
And then marking marked is there. But I do want them, my goal is for them to be able, I mean, there are two things I'm working for. I want them to be able to think about what the sentence means in the same way that they do when they're reading.
Right.
And that's, I hope, is going to reduce the cognitive load and help them to remember the sentence. But I still might divide it into phrases, but I wouldn't do it word by word. So Sam marked makes sense. What? I might just be the line, or it could be the line with a gray pen.
Okay. And then on our last meeting, I had seen that you were using some kind of a motion with your hand.
Oh, right. And that's not actually, let me see if I unshare. Maybe let's try that. If I unshare the screen. Okay, you can see me, right?
Yes.
Okay. So if I were in structured reading, if you said, what is he? Mark the line with the, see, I forgot it. And I just gave myself all those clues and I still forgot it. Mark.
Sam marked the
Okay,
line with a
I'm just
gray
going to
pen.
do, okay, thank you. But I'm going to just do, the line with a gray pen so that, well, you can, I don't know.
I can see your hand.
You can see me, but I couldn't see me because of the thing was in front of me. Okay, so the line with a red pen, that's if I were reading it, because you want to
Right,
blend
right.
those
You
together
swoop
so
it.
they're reading
Yes.
fluently.
Okay.
And so that for that sentence, when I didn't do that this time, guess, but I would, after I've read it once, then Sam marked the line with a red pen. So you're segmenting instead of blending to make it smoother. You're segmenting each sound, giving them more emphasis. So it's in other words, even in that sentence, with a might sound like one word if they need
Okay.
to know that with a is with a. That's probably the best example. The rest of those aren't so bad. But that's the reason. And again, I'm not saying that that's right or wrong or it's just different. And it made sense because I didn't want them to, I wanted them to be focusing on that all those words were there. I want them to know that with a red line with a red pen tells how. I want them to know all those things, but they also need to know what the individual words are if they're going to write them. So it's just a way of integrating that. And to be honest with you, I think I might have mentioned this experience last time, but when I didn't have a class because my older son had been born, and I realized that in order to use the film that my friend had convinced me to make so she could use it for her dissertation, that I would have to send it to Mrs. Slerland before I could use it. And I was really worried because I was working with kids older than the ones in the demonstration classes that I'd been a student in. And I knew that I was using, or at least I was hoping that I was using her rationale appropriately to do the things that I was doing, but I wasn't going to be sitting there beside her. And I was really worried that it was going to be curtains and I was finished. But she figured it out without my help. I mean, I was using her rationale. And she that didn't bother it, none of those things. So, I mean, that wasn't the only one. Decoding to proofread was another, because it had been drilled into my head so much to keep the visual and the auditory separate, which is important. And I understand that, but using what you learned visually to proofread your spelling can be useful, and it is, but I just didn't want to have to depend upon not explaining, all that.
And
anyway,
that would be your next step, wouldn't it? After they wrote down the whole sentence, you would do decoding to proofread, wouldn't you?
yeah, I mean, we'd use a variation of COPS, and the variation is the O in COPS is overall appearance, and we use it for omission. So what I want them to do first is to repeat the sentence and touch each word to make sure it's there. Not just point to it. If they point to it, if it's not there, they're still going to think it's there because they thought they wrote it. They didn't leave it out on purpose. But touch each one. Sam marked the line with a gray pen, which is a proofread version of using your arm to segment the words in the sentence. So are the words all there first, and then they need to proofread for spelling, and they may not need to decode every single, well, they can't decode the red flag words, but they may not need to decode every word, but for the words with suffixes, they need to cover up the suffix and check the base word to be sure it actually has all of the sounds that it needs to say mark. And they find a lot. They don't find every mistake, but they find a lot of them. And it helps. Then they have some way of checking when we're not there, which is important. It takes a little bit longer, but in a classroom, kids don't finish at the same time either. So while one kid is perhaps needing a little extra help to get the rest of the sentence on paper, that decoding to proofread is something that's a good use of time that they can be doing on their way. And then they, checking for punctuation and capital. And some people use chops, which sticks in the handwriting piece. I don't know. Okay. Any questions about that? Oh,
No, thank you.
You can still use the handwriting thing with manuscript, right?
oh, absolutely. Handwriting is writing with your hand, and it could be manuscript. It could be cursive. But it is important when you're talking to parents or even groups of teachers to make that distinction, because for some people, print means manuscript, and manuscript doesn't mean anything to them because they just haven't used the term. We've been taught different terms for the same thing, so we just need to be sure we're speaking the same language. I was trying. I mean, this phrase piece is totally separate from what's down here because there aren't any suffixes or prefixes up here. What I was trying to do here, and I did it several different ways, these happen to be the suffixes that we're practicing in this lesson. But as you saw from earlier, there were other suffixes that they have learned. So this B just meant that you had a base word plus more than one suffix, and then you used one of them in the phrase. I didn't want to separate it because I think seeing it, see how it evolves is good. And you'll notice in a second when I get there. Okay, any questions before I move on to the next piece? Okay, this is just, again, emphasizing that.
Do you want to show us what's on your camera?
Oh, that would be a great idea. Thank you.
Thank you.
I was just using my cursor to beat the band and it wasn't helping anything. Thank you very much, Marcia. Can you see it yet?
Yes.
Okay, it does take a little time. That's kind of interesting. Okay, so, all right. So that A and B, if we had done all of those cursive letter connections that you saw in that lesson, if we had done all of those written auditory cards and all of those single words, that's taken a lot of time in the skills. But as Marcia pointed out, it's preparing them for using that information in the functional use part, which would be the C and D, but the phrases and the sentence. And as time goes on, you may spend less time in the pieces, those pieces, and much more time in the functional use. And I'm certainly, time is not my friend. And I tend to always take more time than I should. But I do also find it important to be sure that kids understand and want a question to be sure that they can say what it is they understand so they can remember it. And so that's a good thing, but I also have to keep in mind that if I'm going to get to functional use, then I might need to do not necessarily less of the questioning, but fewer words that I'm putting in there. So I'm still working on it. I still have an improvement to make. Okay. So this is what we just talked about it, but I talked about it without taking so that was essentially, I forgot to go to these slides where I very nicely covered everything up so it wouldn't be confusing. Okay. All right. And then this was, we already said all this. This is what my lesson plan looks like. I don't use that. I mean, the one that I showed you, when I'm learning, I would have needed to use it because it has all the pieces, but I can put it all on one side of one piece of paper. I used to put it on, always write it on a 5x7 index card that was a color. And then I finally, one of the teachers one year gave me a clothespin to put around my neck so I could clip it to me, because I would put the card down and I couldn't find what I was teaching when I put it down to help somebody. But nevertheless, it's all on here. And now, of course, in the olden days when there were no computers, I couldn't have done this. And now, I could still cut it apart and put it on cards, but then I have to cut and paste. It's just it's easier to hold on to the card than it is a piece of paper. But the important thing is that it's all here. So again, I might not use all of these, but these are the same. This is exactly what you saw on the other. It's just fitting on one place so you can see. And this side one, page 3, the only reason that's important is so that I know what the kids can fit. And you see, I was running out of space in a few places. I could have done this again and it would have looked a little better. But, and it's why I knew I couldn't put 3 words with suffixes. And so that's why I had to do marker orally. But the point is that I want the categories. I do want kids sometimes to write larger when they're doing the connections for a longer time. I could have put all of this on the 5-line paper, and eventually that's what would happen. And with some kids, it happens a lot sooner than with others because the handwriting isn't an issue. But for those kids who resist using their whole arm, it really makes a difference in helping to make it automatic. And you see there when it's larger, you see that you really do have to dip down further when it's a high connection E. Same thing here. Okay, so then these were the written auditory cards, and this mistake was because I was working where the light wasn't what it was needed to be, and I confused the brev with the macron in the words that were on the lesson plan when I was copying it, and this was an O, and then I tried to cheat and turn it into an A, and then I realized it was supposed to be an O, so I had to put brackets around. So I've confessed. It's all out there. Okay. All right. So now you might say, why would you bother to go to all this trouble? Well, that's a good question. And you might not need to if it's just you, but I have to tell you, in checking teachers' lesson plans in summer school, when I have this sheet, first of all, it helps them so they know what paper they need to have and how many pieces of paper, so they don't have to go rummaging around looking for it in the middle of the lesson. But when I have this in front of me and I know what is supposed to be in their lesson, I can still go back into the lesson plan and find it. But you can very easily, you look down here and you see, do they have the written auditory cards that they needed to practice? Do they have the letter connections that they needed for what they're going to have to do when they get to the functional use pieces? And it's a lot faster, but it does take time. But everybody who's going to do it or not do it has to decide how it helps. But for planning purposes, it can be very useful. And as I said, I don't necessarily, even if I'm doing this all on 5-line paper, I might have the letter connections and the written auditory cards on one side and still turn it over to the other side when I start writing words, or I might have room to write words on the other side of the paper. When I get to phrases, the words are on one side, the phrases are on the other. Because one of the things that I'm really trying to get across to them is, yes, they can look up and just copy it, but they know how to figure it out. They just did it, and they can do it again. And this time, the second time, it'll be even faster than the first time. If they think they can only write the phrase if they copy what they wrote in parts, then they leave thinking they had to do that. And again, that doesn't mean I'm right. That's just the way I think. All of us have different ways of doing these things and thinking it through. But I'm really trying to get them to know what they know and be confident of what they can do, and even when we're not there to help them. Okay, any questions about this? And the only reason I put some in black was just to separate the pieces so you could see them.
I do have a real basic question.
Okay.
On the 2-line, 3-line, 4-line, is
Mhm.
this an 8.5 by 11 sheet of paper? I've not
No, no.
seen.
The good question. These
Yeah.
are the twice 8.5 by 11, 11 by 17, and it used to be 12 by 18, but and we would fold it for the 2-line, but well, now we have paper that's printed, but it is 11 by 17, and you can print it. And I know I can send you the templates, and you can print it yourself.
That'd be
I
nice.
like it having the noble rule. I don't like the paper where there's a huge space here. I want kids to have to practice figuring out when the lines are continuous without a huge space between lines. And that's just another one of my idiosyncrasies. But and then I have one that it's 8.5 by 11. It was originally made on the paper that slightly narrower and slightly longer paper, A4, A whatever it is that is used in European countries, but it has 17 writing lines, but it has solid, dotted, solid, solid. So you've got that tail space there. And that was something that was requested by the high school students that I was working with in Dubai. They said, can you give us some paper that has that extra space that looks more like what we have to use in school? So the line, in that case, it is 8.5 by 11. But they have that tail space. So when they're using the cursive, the letters aren't running into each other. They requested that, but I sure wasn't going to say no to that request. And they used it even when they went back to school. So did I answer your question somewhere in there?
Yes, you did. Thank you so much.
You might need to remind me to send you the template. I think everybody else might already have it. But if you don't have it and you want it, just send me an email. And
Yeah, I don't have it. And yes, I'll send you an email. Thank you so much.
I'd like to think I would remember, but I won't. Okay, thank you. Okay, so now this is something I said last time, but just remind, and I'm saying it again because it's in the latest perspectives, and hopefully it'll motivate you to go to the references in the at the end of the PowerPoint. It's the summer 2020 perspectives from IDA, and it's talking about integration more in terms of the phonological pieces, but still teaching your reading in tandem rather than separately can help build reading skills. Complete knowledge of the English writing system occurs when it chooses not only to decode, but also to encode or write. And carrying that a step further, it's taking that parsing that we do in structured reading and helping to carry it over and use it for trying to remember the words in a sentence that's being dictated. Teaching spelling and reading together strengthens the connection between sound and print. Speech and print would be more likely to correct. Okay. And then my favorite quote from Mrs. Slingerland. Well, that's one of my favorite. The other favorite is, speed is not the road to success. Careful practice is the road to speed. It's a tie between them. Okay. Then back to skills to functional use. Now, keeping in mind that when we talked about A and B as being it's not there. Okay, I thought it was. It's okay. A and B being the skills parts and C and D being the functional use. And so if we look at this, under C, spelling, and C, preparation for reading. And the one we're focusing on is this one. But the who, what, where, when, why, how. So think about these aspects and then think about now. Wait a second. What next? So think about that lesson, that review lesson. That student was reviewing concepts that had been previously taught. And the list in the alphabet card pack gives you an idea. Certainly it gives you the consonant graphemes, the single consonants and the consonant digraphs. It gives you the vowel graphemes and the types, left off a paren there, sorry. And does it tell you, does it list the affixes that have been taught? It does list, if you go back to that page, it does list the suffixes.
Suffixes.
It does list the suffixes. It doesn't list any prefixes, but I think, did I put it next? I didn't. Okay, I'm gonna have to move something to make it easier for you to see. Okay, let me move that. Oh, come on. I copied you. You didn't. That's not a copy. Sorry, if I'm making you dizzy. Copy. Maybe I better go up here to just be sure. Copy. You want to say some magic words now for me? So hopefully he'll. Okay, thank you. All right. So if we look up here, I guess I should have chosen the one where it's covered up everything except this. But no, I can't do that. So if you look, you can skip all this and go down to the words now. The words here. And then I'm going to have to do the same thing twice. Sorry, I didn't learn from my mistake. All right. Because most of the words are on here. So the words, for the most part, yeah. So the question was, the suffixes were listed in blue under the card pack cards. But are there any words in any of, where are the phrases there? Yeah, here they are. Never mind, I can go to the next one. So look at the words in the phrases, look at the words in the sentence. Are there any prefixes? I will say there are, if you find prefixes, you will, they aren't ones that have been taught as prefixes, but do you see words that have prefixes in them that we haven't necessarily taught?
Invent.
Okay.
Invention.
Okay.
Would calm be one?
Yes, exactly. And I haven't taught, I would not have, or I had not taught her COM or CON, which is assimilates to COM before a P because of the lips together.
Oh,
And then the IN. So if the CON is the prefix and it means with or together, and it changes the spelling often depending upon what the next element begins with. And in this case, if you say and you say p, in both cases your lips are together, and that, remember, oral language came first, and so that spelling was based upon that oral language. So I haven't taught it, and I probably wouldn't teach it yet to that student as because if I used it for this word, I would have to teach the base plex. And I may or may not be ready to do that, but I could still talk about it. So complex, if this were on the visual side of the plan and we were decoding, for example, I know we're doing auditory today, but for just a minute, turn off your auditory switch and turn on your visual one, and assume that these two words were in a list of words that you had the student decode. And he's found the vowel graphemes, he's divided the word into syllables, and he's figured out that the way to pronounce the word that he's looking at is complex. And you might say, do you know what that means? And what might be a word a kid would use to say what complex means if they know what it means?
Hard, difficult.
Hard, right? They might say hard,
Or lives in an apartment complex.
right. That would be a complex as opposed to complex. And then you could talk about that the word has two meanings depending upon where you put the stress. But if you're talking about complex, or you might just say the word is complex, can you use it in a sentence and see how they use it in a sentence? And then maybe that would tell you what they think it is. Or if they have no idea what it means, then you could say it means complicated. And so then you could say, do you know that there are two word parts and each one of those parts has a specific meaning? So once you know the meanings of those parts, you could figure out not only that word, but other words that have the same piece. So you could say the COM means with or together, and PLEX is layers. So, is layer the word I'm looking for? Hold on a second. It is layers, but there might be another denotation that I'm not thinking too quickly. So I'm going to show you and you'll see me. This is my work in progress list of base elements that will never end. I'll be gone before it is finished. Gotta see plex. Okay, can you see it?
No.
You can't see it. So that's because I'm sharing the other piece. I have to unshare. Okay, that's all right. I can do that. Unshare, share. Okay, I'll highlight it. So, okay. So this is two spellings for that base. Okay. And
Yes.
words that have it, like accomplice. That's not what I meant to do. Accomplice, complex, duplicate. But come on, keep going. Where's the other piece? Oh, now you can't see what I can see. I can't see what you can see.
What a great list.
We're still seeing your list.
Okay, good. All right. And it means weave, entwine, or connect. So I was wrong. It wasn't layers. There's another one that has more than twist or fold. So, but weave, entwine, or connect. So if COM means with or together, and the PLEX means weave or connect, it means to weave together different ideas. So if something's complex, they're different things that are woven or connected together. Now, do I expect that they're going to remember that because I just told them once? Of course not. But I can say, can you think of any other words that have plex in them? And that one's not going to be quite as easy. It's the PLICE that's going to have more of them. And so that probably wasn't the best choice. But we'll do the same thing with vent, and that'll be VENT, and that'll be a little bit easier. So what I would do then, and again, it depends upon who I'm working with and if I'm in a classroom or if I'm just working with one kid, but I would have one pocket chart that has prefixes, one with suffixes, and one with bases. And it's a pocket chart because I want to add things as they come up. I'm not going to assume that because I've mentioned it once, that they know what it means and can use it forevermore, but they've heard it. It's familiar to them, and they can look over there at that chart, then let's do the VENT because that one's going to be a lot easier. So it was invention. And if I've taught them shun, then I've taught them that the words that end in shun have that suffix that makes the word into an idea. So what's it the idea of? An invention is the idea of what's the base, or what's the stem, which includes a base and a prefix. It's the idea of
VEN?
inventing something. It's the idea of inventing something. And so IN is a prefix, and sometimes it means in or into, and sometimes it means not. VENT is here, and it means to come. Intervene, come between. Convention, come together. So when something's invented, what happens? Is it in or not, first of all?
Yes.
Is an invention something that comes into being, or is it not coming?
No, it comes into being.
Comes into, yeah, so it's an into, and it means come. And the minute you, and so then you could say, can you think of any other words that have VENT in them? And again, these are not the easiest. I should maybe I don't know.
Advent.
Well, Advent, if they celebrate Christmas with Advent as front and center, which of course it is, but
Prevent.
Venture.
prevent, excellent. There you go. Keep going. What was that last one?
Venture.
Good. Okay, see? And then what? And then to talk about, so if what is event, are you using it as a noun or as a verb?
Depends on what my sentence is.
Okay, well, you want to make a sentence?
Put me on the spot. And now I
Well,
can't
actually,
think.
go
Sure,
back to
because
what Ruth said. What was your word, Ruth?
Advent.
And what was your word?
Venture.
Now, if you put those together, I bet it'll be easier to come up with a sentence.
Oh, very good.
So what's your word?
Going on an adventure.
Okay, so
Oh, but my word was venture, not adventure.
I know, but what I was suggesting to you, you're right. But if you were having trouble using venture by itself,
Right.
and then then I went to Ruth and she said her word and you said your word, and I asked if you could get something out of those two together that you recognize.
Or
And,
if you say, I
and then
will
you could
venture
go back to
out
venture,
doors.
but adventure. So AD is to or toward, and VENT.
Oh, I
is
see.
come.
You would put the two words together. Okay, I was trying to make a sentence with the advent, as in
Well, you
the
still
advent
could
wreath.
do that. You still
That's
could
right.
do that.
Advent wreath. That works.
But
Mhm.
advent might be difficult for some kids to put into a sentence, and venture might be, but they all know what an adventure is. And
Okay.
so you could start there, and then you could see if anybody could go back in the other direction. You see, you
Okay.
never know what's going to come until you give it a try. And you
That's
don't
true.
have to, but wasn't that kind of fun?
It makes the brain work. And what's really, really fun is when you feel the part of your brain that is working.
Yeah, exactly, that it's alive. Right?
Yeah.
Yeah, and these two, I mean, the VENE is hard. The words that have it in them are easy. So if the word that was decoded was intervene, then you might have an easier. It might be a little bit more concrete and less abstract. And again, it doesn't always work the way you want it to, but and you might not do that for every single time you come up with a word that has one of those prefixes, but you don't have to have taught it officially as a prefix that you're using in spelling to comment on it when it shows up in reading, which just makes kids notice. Then they start noticing when those things occur.
Now, isn't intervene have many different, like several parts to it, like vene and would inter or in, do you have in and ter?
No, well, what does ter mean? Is ter a prefix or a base?
Oh, say it again, a prefix or a base?
It's a good, well, it
Yeah,
has to be
prefix.
one or the other, can't be a suffix because it's not
Yeah,
after the base,
prefix.
but
Prefix.
oh, say, so it could be, I mean, your hypothesis is that you have two prefixes, in and ter. Can you think of any other words that have ter as a prefix when in isn't there?
Terrestrial? No, I don't know.
You got terrarium.
Syllable? No.
Go back to terrarium.
Hold on to terrarium, but hold on to that. But okay, so what I would do in that sense is I'd go to the word searcher and then ask for all the words that just ask for ter.
Okay.
But in terrarium, the ter is a base.
Oh,
Hold on, let me find it. This is the different base. Terrarium is not, I have to find it. Okay, I have to, and now I'm going to have to unshare and then show you, because I don't have that one in here. It should be Terra. It's like Earth.
That's right.
Not just terrarium, but there are other, think of some other. I know-
Mediterranean,
Yeah, okay.
terrestrial.
There you go. And then there's the terras and terrible, which is, that's a
Like a-
ter in terrible is another one. So there's three bases that have ter. But I will, for those of you who can stay, I'll show you the Edam Online thing. But just because I know some of you have to leave, is the idea here is not that you only have so much time, but you can get, it makes kids become more aware and to think about it. And and the fact, Laura, that you were asking, there was the possibility, we just talked about the fact that in was a prefix. So if in is a prefix, then maybe ter is too. It could have been. It isn't. ter is a different prefix, which means between, excuse me, like intercept, interrupt,
Okay.
which we'll probably be seeing a lot of in a few minutes on the debate.
Right.
They can turn off his mic now, and they can turn off both mics now.
Yeah,
So,
but that doesn't mean he's not going to be shouting and he's going to be disturbing everybody.
All
Yeah,
right.
but you're right. That's a good thing.
Yeah.
Okay.
we're a couple of minutes over, so
Okay. All right. So, okay. That's what, so I guess to be continued. I know we can continue it because we're doing decoding next week. So that's good. All right. Let me just, all right. I just have a couple of parting thoughts. One is, I said it last time, but the fact that we taught something doesn't mean that a student has learned it. I'm sorry to laugh. That's not funny. Okay. A new learning has been mastered only when the student can put it to functional use with reasonable independence and understanding, meaning they can use it without us right there. Not that we don't need to be there to begin with, but the ability to use what has been presented comes from continuing practice and integration with other learnings, both past and new. Each new learning must be practiced for functional use and integrated with past learnings to provide the basis for the next step. So as you move along, there'll be more and more words that you don't need to decode individually because you know the kids can figure them out. And that's our goal. So what makes learning stick? What makes it become permanent? Practice, unfortunately, or fortunately. But no matter what it is, practice comes into play there. Okay, and then this is I put this in red, triple word form theory, for any of you who want to read more about that.
We're not seeing that on our screen.
you're
We're
not.
still seeing the list.
Oh, thank you. Stop. Start. Sorry about that. It's in the and remember I sent the handout twice. I sent it with the other handouts and it was too small to read without a magnifying glass. And then I sent the PowerPoint separately. And they're exactly the same. One's color, one's black and white. So this is the Berninger article on triple word form theory. And these other ones are the same as last time. And not the other books. Some of them will be the same. This is the perspectives if you're trying to find that. But if you just go to IDA website and ask for perspective summer 2020. That'll come up. Okay. I hope this was better. And I will send you the, I think I'm just going to send you the Microsoft Word and the PDF version of the feedback form. And please, if you would fill it out and let me know what worked and what didn't work, and what you thought was a waste of time and what you'd like more time on. It's okay. It won't hurt my feelings. I go through that conversation with myself several times a day. So it's nice to have somebody else give me their opinion. Okay, but thanks. And thanks for asking the questions. That to me felt so much better to get comments, questions, and I hope that I was able to answer them. And next week, it's visual. Not next week, 2 weeks
Yes,
from today.
The 5th, November 5th.
2 weeks from today.
Yes.
Okay.
You did a fabulous job, and
Thank
you
you.
made things far more clear for me. Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you for asking your clarifying questions.
Thank you, Nancy. It's great.
Thank you. Thank
How
you.
many suffixes are in clarifying? Okay. I think I think that somebody named Elise is going to cut off my. Is going to mute me if I'm not careful.
No, no. I'm actually gonna stop our recording right here and
Okay, you can.
How, Elise, how do